Oh, boy. How do you introduce a living legend? I know. Oh, my God. But you know what? He's a real person.
Okay.
I know, I love it. That's his stance. I know. It's so wonderful. Gosh. This is so cool. I love my job. I love it. Gosh, talk about people's missions. And his life majorly changed. He took a way back there and then has lived this the rest of his life, made this totally his mission. Something caught him and said, go this way. And aren't we grateful? Yes.
Okay.
Really. Totally new thought. Yeah. I mean, my goodness. Unsolved mysteries, but, if we ever get them solved. But, I love this because, some audiences he may get, they're going, well, I just don't know, I don't know. But we're probably going, oh, of course, yeah. We're just like, yeah, give us more. We love it. So, but yeah, it's like, oh, this is so wonderful. The things I just wish, I love all the videos that I wish I could just go, okay, but he has presented and all the information. Wouldn't you just love to be that little bug on his, on his coat and his lapel that could just go everywhere with him and just see everything he has seen? All of the things he has seen. Don't you know? Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. I'm just starting to see some things in these sites that I've seen. I can't even imagine what he has seen. Oh my gosh, the world that he has been exposed to. Oh my.
Mamma mia.
I know. It's so cool. So how about we let Erich start and tell us?
Okay. Yes. So.
Okay. Erich von Däniken, everyone.
Can I help you? So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ramon. Ramon is my secretary. And he and I, we flew in yesterday from Switzerland. It was about 10-hour flight or a little more, and we're still a little tired. And my English is not perfect. I try to do my best. Is somebody here who speaks perfectly German? No? Or we could use as interpreter. So, anyhow, it all started for me when I was a schoolboy. I was educated in a Catholic boarding school in Switzerland, the boarding school which was led by Jesuits. And of course, as a boy, I was a very, very deep believer in God. I am still a deep believer in God, but my belief has changed a little. And then at that time, God, for me, when I was a boy, had to have some qualities, some minimum qualities. For example, God would make no mistake. Or God, the real God, would never use a vehicle in which to move around from point A to point B. God is all over. Or of course, God would be out of time. A God who must make experiences and then he has to wait, but the result is not the real God. So these were some ideas I had as a 16-year-old boy in my brain. And then in the boarding school, we had to translate parts of the Bible, Greek to Latin, Latin to German. And there I learned that the God of the Bible, at least this God, he uses a vehicle in which to move around. And he makes experiences, and he doesn't know what the result is. And so a few of these qualities were melted. And I had simply doubts in my own Christian education. And I wanted to know if other communities in antiquity have similar stories than we have in the Christian Jewish tradition. And that's how it all started. And the result finally was Chariots of the Gods. I wrote Chariots of the Gods in 1966. That's an eternity ago. But in the beginning, I could not find a publisher. every publisher where we sent the manuscript said, no, this is impossible. This is not professional enough. We can never publish such a crazy thing. And finally, one German publisher took the risk, and you know the result. Okay. Now, going to the actual state. It's a long, long time ago, and I don't know how long ago, but at least 6,000 years, where gigantic spaceships surrounded around our globe. How do we know this? First of all, we know it from the old Hindu, the Indian texts. We know it from the old Hindu text. In the text, there is the big book called Mahabharata. And the German and the English version of the Mahabharata, which we have, it's just nothing. The original has about more than 1,200 pages, separated in different books. And in the 5th book of the Mahabharata, you can read that of a sudden, gigantic cities surrounded our planet. These ancient people did not use the word spaceship or spacecraft because they had no word for it. They didn't know what it was. They said, of a sudden, cities surrounded our globe. And there were 3 cities up there. The people observed them. They had different colors. And of a sudden, out of these cities, smaller vehicles descended. The old Hindu called the smaller vehicles the Vimanas. And out of these Vimanas, some beings came. They were human-like looking. I explain you later why they were human-like looking. And these beings, so-called gods, came out of these Vimanas, and they looked around, and they took some of the young people. You come up with me, and you come up with me. And one of these young people had the name of Arjuna. And Arjuna was up there in one of these cities for at least 3 years. Sometimes he came back to Earth, then he was taken up there. He learned the language of these beings up there. And then he realized that these extraterrestrials, he learned that they are extraterrestrials, that they have a war among them, each other. They were not friendly. They were fighting against each other. Later, when he was back on Earth, he described what he had seen and his experiences. And now we have the book, the 5th book of the Mahabharata, and we have young guys like this one, and I asked him, listen, here we have the old text. Now let us imagine how this would look in pictures. We have the writing, the written form, how this would look in pictures. And we made a computer animation of that, what Arjuna reported. He said these cities around the earth were looking like gigantic spheres composed of different bulls, separate bulls. He himself was brought up with a small vehicle. The small vehicle is called Vimana, and he even gives the name of the pilot. He says his pilot's name was Matali, who brought him up there. And he said, when I was up here for the first time, I saw hundreds of other Vimanas of different shape and different form. Some of them were flying, others of them were in a big hall, just standing there. And as I said, he came up there, he learned the language of these beings, and he was taught in several belongings, and he learned that these so-called gods had fights among each other. They did not have the same opinion. And of a sudden he realized that there was a war in heaven. One of these gigantic space cities were fighting against the next one. And Arjuna describes it were like gigantic yellow beams. 2 of the cities were destroyed. And from the earthling, it looked as if gigantic stars would fall down on the ground. Now, this is a computer animation which we made out of the old text of the 5th book of the Mahabharata. Now, when I was a boy, I always learned that heaven is a place of happiness. When we die, when we have been living in peace and friendly and correct, not stealing, not lying, not killing somebody, when we die, we will come to heaven. Heaven is the place of happiness, because in heaven you are very close to God, to the Almighty God. But here I learned that heaven is not the place of happiness. In that case, heaven was a place of war. And then I remember from my Catholic education, even in our Christian tradition, it all starts with the war in heaven. Maybe you remember, there was an archangel with the name of Lucifer. And Lucifer, with his disciples one day, went to the throne of the Almighty God in heaven and said, "We don't serve you anymore." And then the Almighty God asked for the archangel Michael to destroy Lucifer, or to throw him and his disciples out of heaven. So I said to myself, but heaven is not the place of peace, of happiness. We must change the word of heaven. With heaven, they obviously mean space. Or we have other words in our religious books, for example, angels. What is an angel? I mean, in our tradition, how we have been educated, an angel is a peaceful being. Of course, in the designing, he has wings. He has some sort of halo around his head. He's a messenger from God. But I'm sorry, these angels, even the one in the Bible, and I will just prove this, they had sex with humans. And they made wars. So maybe we should change the word angel into the word of extraterrestrial. Now this is a transformation conference. And we have to think differently. And we came to a different result. I have done this. If we only change 10 words of the old holy writings into modern terms, like angel into extraterrestrial. Archangel is the boss of a group of extraterrestrials. Heaven is not heaven, heaven is space, etc. Just we change about 10 words in the old tradition, and we have a complete new meaning of the old text. And it starts to make sense. In the beginning, we have always translated everything in a religious and psychological form. But maybe this was wrong. Maybe it was reality. And we should look at these things as reality. Then, so many of our ancestors were brought into the heavens. I will come up with a few examples of this. Like the biblical Elijah, for example, you remember, or Enoch, I will speak about him. Even Abraham was brought into the heaven. All these figures were educated in heaven, and then they returned safe to earth. So heaven was in reality space. And really, with some example, we can prove this. There is a Temple of Edfu. Edfu is in Greece, in Egypt, of course. And the writing in hieroglyphs tells a story about a god with the name of Horhut. And Horhut, he was obviously linked together with the Pharaoh at that time. And the Pharaoh was surrounded by enemies. Pharaoh asked his god, Horhut, for help. And this Horhut, with the flying wings, a flying sun disk with wings, flew down to the earth and killed the enemies of the Pharaoh so fast that they could not even hear or see him, which means he had obviously a very high speed because they could not even hear him. And the same thing is handed down in several mythologies where you see the winged god, the flying god, coming down and destroying humans. Even in our Bible, just read the second books of the Kings, chapter 19, verse 35. There, an angel from heaven killed in a few minutes 185,000 Assyrians. In a few minutes, 185,000 Assyrians. There was no war, no fighting, no knife, no beams, nothing. No wagon, no tanks, nothing. Just being killed from the air by a so-called angel. That's why I say we must change the word angel, into extraterrestrials. Angels are something completely different. Another case which you are familiar with, but which I have to come up because I have the best examples for it, is the case of Ezekiel in the Bible. Everyone can read the Bible here, and everyone will find the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament. I will tell you the whole story now, and I will start. Wat kann ich das abziehen? Oder kann ich das? Aha. Kannst du den Joke behind? Warte, ich kann es sagen. We are talking Swiss German. Some people say that's not the language; it's a kind of sickness. So I will first show you 5 pictures out of an old Bible, just to give you an impression what our forefathers had in mind. After these 5 pictures, I will explain you how we made the modern interpretation and who helped us with the modern interpretation. And then we show you the details, and finally you see a computer animation concerning Ezekiel, which is the best thing you have ever seen concerning Ezekiel. So, Ezekiel, by profession, was a high priest in the Temple of Jerusalem. And during his lifetime, Jerusalem was captured by the Babylonians. Ezekiel belonged to the high society as a high priest, so he was captured too, among many others, and he was brought to Babylonia. And there they had to work as slaves for the Babylonians. And while they were working, he heard a noise in the sky. And all the slaves looked up there, including Ezekiel, and they see something coming out from the sky. This something makes a big noise. Ezekiel compares the noise with the thundering of a waterfall. Must be very, very noisy. And finally this thing comes down and stands before Ezekiel and the other slaves. In the beginning, Ezekiel believes it must be God. And he was a high priest, so he's saying, I must honor the Almighty God. And then he stands up to give honor to God, and he realizes this is not God. This is something different. First he says, on top there was something glittering, with glittering rays. A glittering rays here, okay, up there. And there was something like a throne. And on the throne, someone was sitting in glittering clothes. And he looked like a man. He does not say he's a man, he looked like a man. So the human form, the human says. The whole thing here, altogether, Ezekiel calls the splendorness of God. So the whole gigantic ship in his eyes is the splendorness of God. Under this throne, he sees 4 creatures, and he cannot understand it. And the 4 creatures have wings. And when the wings moved, again, this noise started. Lower than the wings, there were 4 wheels. And now Ezekiel does not understand his life anymore. In his time, there were wheels which go forward and backward. But here, at the splendorness of the highest, he sees wheels which go in every direction. Look, the wheels go forward, backward, right, and left, all at the same time without making a steering movement. You see, when you sit in your car, you turn the wheel, so your wheels turn. But Ezekiel sees wheel, they go forward, backward, left, and right, without making a steering movement. That confuses him so much that he describes the wheel 4 times. And under the wheel, finally, he sees legs. The legs were striped and sparkling, and he says they were like metal. And so on, and so on. You have to read this all in the Bible. Some 30 years, nearly 30 years ago, I had a secret conference in Huntsville, not this Huntsville, Alabama, where NASA is. It was secret because only about 25 persons were allowed to come to my speech, all the high priests from NASA, the technicians like Werner von Braun and so on. And at this secret conference, I also referred to Ezekiel. Finally, at the end, we had a dinner all together. And then the chief of the construction department An ex-German, his name was Joseph Blumrich, came to me and said, well, Mr. von Däniken, that was quite impressive, but I do not believe that in the Bible you find some technology. In the Bible you have some visions, dreams, but nothing technology. This is impossible. Anyhow, he said to me very friendly, I was the first who brought him to Ezekiel. He never in his life read Ezekiel, and he wanted to do this now. And he did it. And he started to take Ezekiel word by word, every phrase. Then two other NASA scientists, both working on big rockets, came to Joseph Blumrich and said, hey, what are you doing here with the Bible in your hands? And he said, this is very interesting. Here, we can reconstruct what Ezekiel was writing. And they did it. And this here was the outcome. Now you see, this does not look like a spaceship. We today, we would call this a space shuttle. In orbit must be a mother spaceship, a gigantic thing. And from the mother spaceship, this small vehicle has come down to Earth. Ezekiel calls the whole construction the splendorness of God. The whole construction. Now on top, he sees something glittering. And inside was something like a throne. And sitting on the throne was this human-looking like being. And it was just the pilot sitting in his seat. That's all. Ezekiel speaks about 4 living creatures with wings. Where are there living creatures? Do you see any living creatures? Do not forget, all this is at least 3,000 years ago. They, at that time, the humans, had no idea of technology. They could not understand why somebody is moving without the force of a human or the force of an element. Now these things, these wings were moving by itself. So he describes them as if they were alive. For him, this is living because it's moving. And he clearly makes a difference. He describes soon as the wings start to move, the noise begin again. When the wings came to a standstill, there was no noise at all. He said even when they came to a standstill, the wings were looking downward to the earth. Soon as the noise began again, the wings were looking up, turning up. And then he described when the wings left up from the earth, the wheels left up too. Of course, I mean, when a helicopter is lifting up, the wheels is not staying on the ground. The wheels go up with them. Ah, yeah, the wheels. The wheels were described very detailed with Ezekiel. I told you, in his time, Ezekiel knows wheels going forward and backward. Here he sees wheels going forward, backward, left and right, all at the same time, without making a steering movement. So in NASA, the scientists, they were thinking about this wheel. And finally, they constructed a new wheel. They separated the wheel into different segments. Each segment ends down here in the sort of, how you call this, whatever it is. So you can turn this on both sides. Look, in practice, it looks like this. Of course, you can move this wheel forward and backward. But if the wheel should move towards you, only the lower segment is turning. Or away from you, it turns on the other side. And with this construction, you can move into any direction, right around the corner, if you wish, which is very practical when you are on a foreign planet where you don't know the situation on the ground. By the way, NASA has received an international patent for that wheel. But in reality, the whole idea comes out of the Bible. So if you are the descendants of the prophet Ezekiel, ask for money. Now, in chapter 40 of the book of Ezekiel, when you read this, a complete different situation starts to be. Ezekiel says, the splendorness of God, so this whole thing, came again, which means it landed the second time among the captors in Babylon. Again. And this time he says, the hand of the Lord put me on the seat. And they brought me to a very, very high mountain. He clearly makes the difference. He does not say, they brought me to a high mountain or to a mountain. Very, very high mountain. And up there, he steps out of the spaceship. And there is a second glittering man. and who says to Ezekiel, human, you humans, you have eyes to see and ears to hear, but you see nothing, and you hear nothing. And then this stranger gives to Ezekiel a measuring device, put the measuring device in his hands, and gives him order that Ezekiel should measure the whole building, which is here, the whole building. And Ezekiel asks, why? Why should I measure this building? And the stranger in glittering clothes simply says, that's the reason why we brought you up here. So Ezekiel starts to measure. Length, large, each side, each step. Just read it in Ezekiel. It's the only place in the Bible where you can read at least 4 pages full of measurements. Completely full of measurements. So in Germany, we had an engineer. His name was Hans Herbert Bayer. And Hans Herbert Bayer took these measurements of Ezekiel, and he wanted to know, is this a real building or just fantasy? Is it just vision or whatever? Like Blumrich from NASA. Blumrich wanted to know, is this something in reality or is it just a vision? Now, Bayer from Germany, the engineer, said, is this measurements real? And he started to reconstruct the building which Ezekiel described. And in fact, it looked like a stadium, and the splendors of God fit perfectly inside. When I received one day, some 30 years ago, a big yellow envelope with measuring dates in there, I did not knew this man, this Hans Herbert Bayer, this German engineer. And I phoned him, and I was fascinated. I said, this is absolutely sensational, what he did here. Do you know what NASA in Huntsville made? He said, no idea of NASA. It was anyhow not published at that time. So I brought this German engineer, Hans Herbert Bayer, together with the NASA engineer, Joseph Blumrich. And both fit together. The splendors of God was the vehicle, and the so-called temple was not the temple at all. It was simply the so-called the station, the base station on Earth to repair or to clean or whatever the extraterrestrial shuttle. Now this is really complicated, and now I have to add a few things about the Ezekiel. You see, I read Ezekiel many times, and I consulted at least 64 professors, biblical professors, exegetes, to explain Ezekiel. Everyone has another meaning. They start off dreaming, and Ezekiel was a psychological problem. He was an epileptic, or he had a dream, or he had visions, and so they tell all kinds of things. And the most knowledge of Ezekiel, they say Ezekiel described the Lord, God, the Almighty God, sitting on his throne wagon, on his throne chariot, and flying around. I said, but God does not need a chariot to fly around. God is just all over, the real God, the Almighty God. And then they say Ezekiel was brought to a high mountain, and there he had a vision of the future temple in the future Jerusalem. But if you know Hebrew, and Hebrew is a Semitic language, from the grammatical point of view, there is no future. It's only the presence. In the original of Ezekiel, he says, and I was on the very high mountain, and there was this building, and it was such and such long, such and such large, and so. But the theologians believe that Ezekiel had a vision of a future temple in the future Jerusalem. So they translated the whole text in the future. When you read Ezekiel in your English Bible, you will read, for example, and the temple will be such and such long. He will be so and so large. But the reality was never the grammatical future. It was only the presence. The temple is so long and is so large, etc. Anyhow, the idea of the theologians do not work in any case. Ezekiel say, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. I'm sorry, in Jerusalem there is no high mountain. Not even very, very high mountain. I was there many times. It's just a few hills around it. That's all. I mean, yesterday we flew in here, and this is called Ozark Mountains, and we asked us, what are the mountains here? And you see, there where we live in Switzerland, in Interlaken, just in front of our eyes, we have mountains which are 12,000 feet high. So where are the mountains? Now, in Ezekiel, there is no high mountain in Jerusalem. And in translation, our theologians, they made so much mistakes, not because they want to make false translation, no. Just they want that the people understand it easier. They have a terrible story. For example, Ezekiel describes a small creek, a creek. On one of the counters, he said, on the southeast counter, there was a small creek. And then when he was lifted up to heaven, he described how this creek becomes to a small river. And the river becomes larger and larger and becomes to a great river, etc. He says it's floating all the time in direction of the north. Then he makes a curve and goes in direction of the east, etc. In the Bible, in the Ezekiel story, you read that this was the Temple Creek, and the water was floating into the Mediterranean Sea. In the original Ezekiel, no word of Mediterranean Sea is there, and nothing. There's no high mountain, no Mediterranean Sea. So it's all just translated partly wrong so that the people may understand it easier. But the story is not true. Now, what really happened? I show you a computer animation, how we think what really happened 3,000 years ago. Maybe the co-pilot's chair. Ezekiel has no idea of technology. He does not know what is going on. He says, and the hands of the Lord pressed upon my chest. It's just the gravity. And the other one says, that's why we brought you here, that you make these measurements. Why should Ezekiel measure a building on a high mountain? What? The extraterrestrial says, well, that's the reason why we brought you here. Why? Just remember, ladies and gentlemen, all this took place at least 3,000 years ago. Our forefathers were Stone Age people. No idea of technology, or spaceship, things, nothing at all. So, a group of extraterrestrials is observing a group of humans. They came down, they realized which of the human is the leader of the group. Ezekiel was the leader. For by profession, he was high priest. They capture him. They bring him up to the high mountain, to their base camp, so to say. And they order him to measure the base camp. Then they bring him back to his own people. Now all his people, the others, hey, Ezekiel, where have you been? What did they brought you? And Ezekiel enthusiastically says, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. Why? What do you have to do there? I had to measure a building. Here are the measuring dates. It's all written down. Because Ezekiel and his society believe that this was not a vision, this was the real Almighty God. And Ezekiel at the same time, he is high priest. His words and his measurements are not just thrown away. All this is important. There was a human which had a contact with God. So these measuring devices and what his experience, what he was writing, is not just for the trash. It's for the future generation. It enters into the holy writings. What it did in practice. The extraterrestrials knew exactly, thousands of years in the future, that human society will have technology by their own. They will develop helicopters and ships and flying machines and so on. And thousands of years in the future, they will read the text of Ezekiel. And they will say, all true, we are deep believers in God, but God does not need technology, and this was technology. This was technology. What happened? So the people in the future start to ask questions because of the writing of Ezekiel. And not only the writing of Ezekiel, we have other writings around the world, like in India, the Mahabharata, and these things. Now the people in the future, we, our generation, we start to ask us, what happened? Some people may suggest, did we have maybe an earlier high society, technological society, which vanished? Or other people come up with the stupid question, well, were these maybe extraterrestrials? Visitors from outer space? And then when we say, okay, maybe visitors from outer space, but where is the proof? We need conclusive proof. And now the future generation starts to look for a possible proof. You always have to have first the question. Without question, you will not go out to make researches. First, you need the question, so that the generations of the future start to look for proof of extraterrestrial. They put it in the holy books, and it worked. Because of Ezekiel and other writings, we know what happened at that time. Another man who was up there for a long time, his name was Enoch. Now, Enoch in the Bible is mentioned very shortly. In the Bible, you just read 2 phrases about Enoch. You read that Enoch was the 7th patriarch before the great flood. What is a patriarch? The first one was Adam, then the son of Adam, Seth, etc. The 7th was Enoch. Then the 8th was Methuselah, the son of Enoch. The 9th was Lamech. And the 10th was Noah, the survivor of the flood. So all this took place before the great flood. Enoch is the 7th patriarch. And you read in the Bible that Enoch was the first man who disappeared with the firing chariot in heaven. That's all what you find in the Bible. Nothing more, just 2 or 3 lines. So how do we know about Enoch if there are only 2 lines? Some 160 years ago, a British explorer came to Ethiopia. And there he went into a convent. And he was fascinated by the convent and what these priests did there. And he finally stood for 30 years in the convent. He has become a monk. And in the convent, he learned the language of the old Ethiopian perfect. And there was a large library with thousands of volumes. And he was starting to read these volumes, some of them. And he came upon a book which was called the Book of Enoch. And he said, come on, Enoch? I know the name from the Bible. Enoch is the one who disappeared the first in the fire chariot. Book of Enoch? Should there be a Book of Enoch? So he started to read Enoch. And the funny thing is, Enoch writes his story in the first person as an eyewitness, not in the second or third person. You see, when I tell, and he flew up there, I tell in the third person. When I flew up there, it's not the same thing. Enoch reports as in the first person. So, this British man, in the meantime a monk, knowing perfectly the language, he started to translate this Ethiopian Enoch into English. And in the year 1900, a German theologian professor, Emil Crouch, translated from the English into German. So I can only show you the German version. The Apocryphs of the Old Testament. Professor Dr. Emil Crouch, in volume 2, you find 129 pages of the book of Enoch. That's why we know about Enoch. So Enoch begins his story. It says, it was evening. The whole community of his village went to sleep. And of a sudden they hear a terrible noise coming up from the clouds. So they all run out of their tents and their huts, whatever they had. And they saw a light coming up from the clouds. And this light was coming to the earth. Then it was quiet. And of a sudden, out of this light, 2 human-like beings came, again in glittering clothes. They came to this couple of people which are waiting out there, and they were all afraid and ran away, except Enoch. He writes he was a boy at that time. He was 12 years old. He bravely stands there. Of course, he was shocked too, but he was not afraid as the others. These 2 glittering beings came close to Enoch, to the boy. And when they are about 2 or 3 meters away from here, he is afraid too, and he fell on his ground. He clearly describes, I was with my nose on the ground, and I smelled the earth, the humidity of the earth. He was afraid. Of a sudden, one of the two took him, put him on his chest, and put him on his feet. Enoch is completely afraid, and he says, one of them said to me, don't be afraid, human. Don't be afraid, human being. We won't do you nothing. Now, in my eyes, these two beings were extraterrestrials. How came that they speak Enoch's language? Some thousands of years ago, our forefathers were Stone Age people. Some extraterrestrials landed on our planet. These extraterrestrials behaved themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They studied a few tribes, learned a few language, give a few advice to humans for a society in the future. And then they disappeared again. But they disappeared with the promise to return in the far future. Ethnologists. Today's ethnologists, they go, for example, on the upper Amazon River. They study different tribes. Some 100 years ago, ethnologists went up to the upper Nile in Africa. They came together with complete strange cultures. No one of these strange cultures spoke English or German or French or Spanish. It was always the ethnologists who had to learn the language of these cultures. And to learn the language was never a problem. I always suggest, ladies and gentlemen, just go for 1 year to France. I suggest go to Paris. And if possible, fall in love. After a year, you speak French. It's very easy. Language was never a problem. And when I say we have it to do with extraterrestrials, with their computer technology, they would analyze a language of a group probably in a few days. So in the case of Enoch, when one of them says to Enoch, don't be afraid, human, don't be afraid, we do you nothing. For me, it's not astonishing. It's normal. They learned the language. So Ezekiel is still afraid. And he said, these two, they were not human. They had not the breast of the human. They were breathing, but not the way we do breathing. They had something on their hair nose. These two, one of the two says to to Enoch, if you wish, we take you, son of the humans, with us, and we will teach you up there. Now Enoch, the 12-year-old boy, he's obviously proud, and he looks to his parents who are standing there, maybe 100 meters away, and he cries and asks, can I go with them? And the parents say, okay. So the boy goes with the two strangers. And they just walk away a few meters, and one of the strangers says to the boy, to young Enoch, son of humans, you stink terribly. You smell terribly. I don't know what his clothes were, but obviously the camel shit and whatever he had on his clothes. So he was stinking. And one of the two says to Enoch, put all your clothes off, jump into the river and wash you completely naked from up to down. So Enoch does it. When he comes out of the water and he's dried, one of the strangers gives him a little sort of a cream. And he orders he should put this cream all over his body. His hair, everything. So Enoch does this. And he smells. And he said, I smelled like ambrosia and honey and two things which we cannot translate today. So he smelled differently. Then one of the strangers gave him a sort of clothes to put on. It was the same glittering clothes which they had on. So the young Enoch, the 12-year-old boy, starts, he doesn't know what to do with these clothes. And one of the strangers explained him, here, put your trousers on, and this. And then he has the clothes on, he looks glittering like the others, and he looks down on his body, and he says, and I looked like them, in the same clothes. Of course, he's in the same overall now, what else? Finally, they go up. They go up to the sky. Enoch doesn't understand nothing. He's a Stone Age man, has no idea of spaceship and whatever. Over the earth, over the planet, he describes there were gigantic things looking like gigantic crystals. He cannot say there was a mother spaceship. He does not have the word for it. So he has to compare it. He can never say, it is. He doesn't have the word. It looks like. So for him, it was glittering. It looked like crystals up there. The sun was reflecting. These three beings, two of the stranger and Enoch, they go close to these gigantic things. Doors opened automatically, closed automatically. Enoch is puffing. He cannot speak anymore. They walk to different gardens. Enoch describes they were garden with fruits and plants in colors and smelling, which I never saw on earth. He's in a strange place. Finally, they come into a big round room. In the center of the room, there was a throne. And on the throne, the highest was sitting. When these three beings came into the room, two extraterrestrial and Enoch, the highest stand up from the throne, goes to Enoch and shakes his hand and said, welcome to him. Now, Enoch is up there, and of course, what I told you now is really written in the Ethiopian book of Enoch, but not in the way I told it you. Why not? Always have in mind that Enoch was translated the first time from the Ethiopian language into English 160 years ago. 160 years ago, none of the professors, none of the translators had an idea of flying machines, of aircrafts, of helicopters, not to talk about spacecraft, absolutely impossible. So these professors, they were all brilliant. They spoke different languages. It was never a question of conspiracy or whatever. No, they simply had no words to translate what it was. In their mind, somebody was brought up there into heaven. He must have been heaven. Now he's in a room, and there sit the highest on the throne. So he's in heaven now, before the Almighty God. So they translated the whole text into religious and psychological terms, which was completely wrong. In reality, when you read Enoch the way it is written, I said 2 extraterrestrials came, but in reality of the book of Enoch, it says 2 archangels descended from heaven. I said these 2 extraterrestrials, they came to Enoch, and one said, you human, you stink terribly. They put him into the water because he was really stinking. But in the normal translation, in the Enoch, in the Catholic translation, it says, now Enoch was put into the water and he was baptized. My God, before the great flood, there was no baptism. This was coming with Jesus Christ, the story much later. Now, because he was stinking, he comes out, and some of the others give to Enoch a cream, to put the cream all over his body. In my eyes, he was simply disinfected. But in the eyes of the translation of Enoch, now he was crème zu einem Priester. He was made to, yeah, to a priest, whatever. So, a 12-year-old boy. As next, he receives the same space overall which they have. But in the real translation of Enoch, it says now he received the garments of a high priest. As if a 12-year-old would receive the garments of a high priest. It's all rubbish. We just translated it wrong. Then they go up there. I say he went up with what we would call today a space shuttle to the mother spaceship. But in the biblical translation, you read, now Ezekiel was brought up to heaven. Then he comes into this garden with different flowers and different fruits, different colors and different smells. I say he was just up there because every mother spaceship has to produce its own vegetable and its own whatever they use. In the biblical version, they say now Ezekiel is working into the paradise or into the garden of the paradise. It's just finally he comes into the round room with the throne in the center. I say now he's standing simply before the chair of the commander of the spaceship. Why the religious translation says now he's standing before the Almighty God. If this would be true, you just imagine a real Almighty God, and I am a deep believer in God. I am one of these persons who pray every evening. But the real God would never stand up, work a few steps to, and shake hands with Enoch. This is all nonsense. Our translations were nonsense in the past, not because of a bad memory or of a bad will. These professors were brilliant beings. Each and every one of them were able to translate at least 4 languages. But they had no idea of technology, of flying and spacecraft. They all believed it has to do with God. That's why these translations are wrong. It's time we may make new translations. Now, Enoch is up there. He learns the language of the extraterrestrials. After a few months, he's already able to speak the language of them. And he even gives the names of his teachers. Enoch is the only one who gives the names of the extraterrestrial. I know, ladies and gentlemen, who they were. You see, these are the names of the leaders, etc. The name of the first is Jekun. The name of the second is Asper. The third is Gadre. He gives 36 names of his teachers up there. He knows the language of them after a few months. And he explains wonderful thing. He says, one of them told me, Enoch, young being, son of the humans, look out there. Look out there. Do you see this little light there? You humans, you call it moon. But the moon has no light by itself. The moon receives his light from the sun. And he explains him, you know, the different phases of the moon. Why is it full moon, half moon, etc. All this in Stone Age, before the Great Flood. The extraterrestrial says to Ezekiel, you see this bright shining light out there? You humans, you call it sun. And then he explains him, all the other stars are suns like our sun. And he explains them how we should make astronomy by measuring the distance, the day, the lightning, the brightness, the distance from one star to the other. All this before the Great Flood. I said before, all these extraterrestrials, they behaved themselves like ethnologists. And Enoch has to realize that some of these ethnologists, they wanted to have sex with humans, which obviously was not allowed. It's like you are on a ship, a normal ship crew on board in the ocean some 100 years ago, and as soon as the crew comes on an island, they want to have sex with the beautiful girl there. So some of them want to have sex. And Ezekiel realized this, and he writes it in his book. Look, but when the sons of heaven saw that the daughters of men were fair, they admired them and decided to mate with them. And they said to each other, we will take them as wives. Altogether they were 200, which descended upon Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. Jared is the father of Enoch. Enoch is the 7th patriarch, so Jared is the 6th patriarch. Now you say, sex with humans? Extraterrestrials, sex with humans? Are extraterrestrials not completely different than we? Why should extraterrestrials have the same sexual apparatus as we have it? This is nonsense. It is not. I will come back to this in a few minutes. And by the way, it's not only in the book of Enoch that these beings had sex. In several other holy writings, you find the same thing. I know 6 books from other groups in the past. But even in the Bible, you can read it. Look at the first book of Moses, chapter 6, verse 1. When the humans began to multiply and had daughters, the sons of gods, in some translations they say the fallen angels. It's always the same. The sons of God. What sons of God? God has no sons. The sons of God saw that they were fair, and they took them as wives. How is this possible? That extraterrestrials, they are not spirituals, they were not angels, they had a body, and they wanted to make sex. How is this possible? I came back to this point. Just give me a little time. So sind wir da weitergekommen. Humans at that time had no technology. The extraterrestrials disappeared again with the promise they will return. And now the humans start to design what they have seen. In the beginning, there was no writing. The first information of humans in Stone Age time were cave paintings. Now I have a book on the market where I show about 200 cave paintings worldwide. I just show you very shortly to prove you that all around the world we have similars. This one is in Valcamonica. Valcamonica is in Italy, near Switzerland. Here we are completely in your country, Arizona, the Hopi Indians. I was there in the valley where they had 10,000 of cave paintings. Here we are in Peru. I will later come to this plain of Nazca, you know, with these lines in the ground. And everyone who flies over Nazca first has to fly over this figure. The figure is 29.5 meters high. So 3 times as high as this building. It's 3 meters high, 29 meters high. And one arm is looking to heaven, the other is looking down. Even in official archaeology, they call this figure El Astronauta, the astronaut. Now we have been in Switzerland, we have been in Hopi, in North America, we are again still in Peru. Some of the designs and the scratching in the rock were made in a way that you can see them only from the air. From the ground you see nothing. Look here, you see nothing. But from the air it looks like this. You have to fly, otherwise you will not see it. This is in the Sahara Desert. My God, Sahara is Africa, far away from Peru. Look at this gigantic figure here, like an astronaut with helmet. His arms has some sort of bendings on his arms. In original, this figure is 6 meters high. 6 meters means about 1.5 times of this. So the cave painter who did it first had to construct something that he can make this gigantic figure of a god up there. This is Australia. The gods with their helmets, with their halos. Now all these figures I show you, this again Australia, they are called Wandinas. All these figures I just showed you are from different continents, some thousands of years ago. But ladies and gentlemen, some thousands of years ago, our forefathers had no contact together. There were no ships to visit other continents. There were no aircrafts, nothing. Why, for God's sake, do they make all the same? All over the globe. And you can prove it easy. Later in the evolution of man, so we started with cave paintings, the primitive form. Later, they learned how to chisel and how to make models. We are here in the Maya city. The Maya city is called Tulum in the Caribbean Sea. The whole city of Tulum is just dedicated to the descending God. When you see something like this here, you see the face, you see his 2 hands firmly, you just have the image to imagine a human on a bobsled. Look, in original it looks like this. But the original are always bad. They are destroyed. You see the legs, always the wings on both sides, and so on. The next one looks like this. You see, he has even shoes on. Again, the wings, his face, and with his 2 hands, he's manipulating some control. In the original, it looks like this. Again, you see his shoes here. The wings are nearly destroyed. The head is destroyed. So this continues all over the world. Practically in every museum in South America and Central America, you find many of these so-called gods with their helmets. When you ask the local archaeologists, what does it represent? They always say, well, we don't know. Some of the gods, okay. What are the gods? Which gods? Why do they have helmets, etc.? In Japan, some thousands of years ago, these figures were produced. And they were holy because they were standing on altars. They are called dogu figures. But Japan, Stone Age, the Japanese Stone Age people had no idea of classes, of suits. So why did they make it? What did they copy? What did they illustrate? What did they want to say? Here again, this is Mexico. The place is called Villahermosa. You see a human being definitely coming down to earth. He has a helmet on. I could even say he has a micro on his lips. Look his 2 arms bending downward, his feet up. One of the messengers descending to the gods. Then here again in your country, we have these Hopi Indians. The Hopi Indians, you know, with their Kachina dolls. There are Kachina dolls, there are also Kachina pictures. And in the Hopi tradition, these were all the teachers from heaven. When you go to Arizona, to the Hopi territory, there is a souvenir shop. You can buy some of these Kachina dolls. But the meaning is always the teacher from heaven who taught our ancestors some thousands of years ago. Now, Hopi is a good example, but it's not the only one. 8,000 kilometers away from Hopi, Arizona, we are down in South America on the upper Amazon River. There is a tribe called the Kayapo. The Kayapo, they have every year a special festivity. They form a circle and they sing a song. And in this song, they sing the tradition, they tell the tradition what happened from their forefathers thousands of years ago. It was evening, and all of a sudden they heard a tremendous noise in the sky. They saw a light coming down. They were afraid. They ran into their caves. They heard that terrible noise. Then it became quiet, and some of them tried to go out. And all of a sudden, there was a big being, a figure, in the center of the village. And this figure had no openings for eyes, ears, mouth. Everything was closed. They were afraid. Now the bravest one ran to him and presented presents on his foot. The stranger himself just gave cookies back. And so they realized he does not harm us. He's harmless. In his hand, he had an object which they call in the meantime a bow. Then a strange animal came out, a jaguar, and wanted to attack. And the stranger with his bow, with his simply put to the animal, and there was a glittering ray, and the animal was paralyzed, not dead, paralyzed. But they realized he doesn't harm us. So in 3 days, the strangers learned the language of the natives. And he explained his name is Bepe Kororosh. In their language, it means, I came from the sky, from the universe. He was there only a few days, but he taught the natives in several belongings. He was the one who teach them in astronomy. This tribe, the Kayapo on the upper Amazon River, they know about our planetary system. There is a sun in the center, then we have the different planets. We learned this only a few hundred years ago. They know it in advance. They know about our calendar, about the moon, about different technology which he gave them. And before he disappeared, he told them, he promised them, in a far future, I will return again to you. Now, that's the reason why they repeat, still today, every year their festivity in honor of the heavenly teacher, so that they will not forget what he said. And he promised to return. And the time, they say today, is close, that Bepe Kororochi was his name, will return to the humans. Palenque is one of my favorite things. I was in Palenque, I don't know how many 100 times. We are here, Palenque is in Mexico. You should go there sooner or later. This pyramid is called the Temple of Inscription. And in 1952, up there, they call it Temple of Inscription because in here you found 716 inscriptions. That's why Temple of Inscription. In 1952, Professor Dr. Rutz, he was a Mexican married with a French lady. He discovered on the ground here some sort of lines. They opened inside a stone, and inside the pyramid, they found a stairway. But in 1952, this stairway was completely full with stones. So they had to put out all the stone. It took 3 years before they arrived 7.5 meters under the pyramid in the ground. And they finally stood before a great door. The door had the form of a triangle. This was the first time that they saw something in the form of a triangle. Of course, there was no bar at that time. That was made later for the tourists. So they opened this door, and inside they saw a big stone. I say big because that's 3.80 meters long, 2.20 meter large, heavy load of 9 tons. It's all one block, not composited. One block, one monolith. And on the stone, an incredible engraving. First you see something around here, starts up, continues here, like a frame. And in the center of the frame, a man is sitting, a figure, bending forward, almost like a racing motorcyclist. He has his nose on some sort of mask. He uses his hands to manipulate control. You clearly see the upper hand here, his knob. The lower hand, you see his 4 fingers. He's sitting on a chair. The heel of his left foot is on a sort of pedal. And out of the frame, you see a linking flame. Now, when this was discovered in 1952, archaeologists have, and by the way, there is a writing around this frame, and only part of the writing was translated. The rest we cannot translate. But according to the writing, it made clear that this figure was Pakal. Pakal is the second last ruler of the city of Palenque. So then, in 1952, the Professor Dr. Rutz, said, well, Pakal is sitting in the open mouth of a mythological monster. You see this here and this down should be the 2 teeth of the mythological monster. And Pakal is sitting inside. So he falls into the mythological monster. He falls into the earth. But out of his body, a living cross, the cross of life, or the living tree is coming. They interpreted in 1952, what I said is looks like a linking flame. These are just the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god. Terrible. Anyhow, the situation changed since 1952 in the academic books. In the meantime, 14 different explanations have come forward about Palenque. And the newest explanation came from 2 American professors from the University of Texas. They both have the same name because it's the father and the son. Their name is Stewart. And they are the best epigraphs. Epigraphs means translator in Maya language. Absolutely the best today, accepted by all the Maya archaeologists. And these 2 fellow professor and son, they say, no, it is Pakal, that's true. But Pakal is not falling into the open mouth of a mythological monster. He's not falling into the earth. This is not the tree of life or the cross of life. And this is not the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god. Every detail, everything can be explained cosmologically. Pakal is leaving the earth. He's flying away from the earth, out into the universe. So the new translations come now close to my meaning. Now, during all these past years, since 1952, I was attacked and accused that I look at this picture the wrong way. We look at it this way, but in reality, we should look upward down, principle. It looks like this. Now, when I see this with my imagination, it immediately brings me to another continent. Let's fly shortly to another place. I came back here. When you go to Asia, you have this gigantic temple, Borobudur. The Borobudur is in Indonesia. Composed of hundreds of these things here, they are called stupa. The stupa in Buddhism has different meanings. It's 14 different meanings. One of the meaning of the stupa is that this is the small vehicle with which you reach the big vehicles of the gods. You need a small vehicle, you have to make certain praise, certain movements, and then you reach the big vehicles of the gods. That's why all these stupas are not empty. In every stupa, someone is sitting. In that case, the young Buddha. It's a Buddhist temple. And what is he doing in here? Look, he's sitting with his elbows like this, and he's manipulating some controls. Let's go back to Palenque, where we were before. If you look at it this way, here he's sitting with his elbows. He's manipulating the controls. Maybe this is the real way to look at it. Yes, my dear. Now, Nazca. I learned that tomorrow I have a workshop, and there I will go more into details of Nazca. What I want to show you now is just some Nazca pictures which you never saw. But tomorrow I show you 40 other pictures that you just see, this is not Nazca. You see, we have many on television all the time, every half a year. Some archaeologists explain us something about Nazca. And what you see on television is absolutely not the truth. It's only maybe 5% of the reality of Nazca. Nazca is a real mystery. You see, these gigantic lines here, mountains are cut off. You never see it on television. Here it's all green because it's artificially watered. Without it, it will still be lines out there. I always hear Mr. von Däniken suggested, well, it looks like airstrips. It looks like, I never said it is an airstrip, but it looks like. Starts abruptly, ends abruptly. But it does not look like airstrips. They say, why, for God's heaven, what the hell does that look like? Am I blind or the only blind in the world? Start abruptly, end abruptly. There are three different things on the plane of Nazca which you have to separate. The first thing are the figures. The natives called them las figuras. Figures of fishes, monkeys, spiders, and all these kind of things, birds. But the figures are small. The so-called hummingbird is just 29 meters long. The next things are small lines. They are only about 1 meter large, the small lines. But the longest of these small lines are 23 kilometers long. 23 kilometers straight ahead over hills and mountains. The third thing you see are these large lines. They are called las pistas. So the natives have the figure, las figuras, las líneas, the small line, and las pistas. The biggest of these las pistas is 2.88 kilometers long. It will be big enough for landing of an aircraft there. And you never see on television, this mountain is scratched off, and beneath the las pistas, you see some zigzag lines. In the meantime, in the archaeological literature, I read incredible things what Nazca was. First they say it's an astronomical calendar. Then it had no point to astronomy. It was a cult for the water gods. Now it was a cult for the mountain gods. The next one said it was a cult of agriculture. My goodness, this is desert. There was never agriculture. Nothing was growing up here. And then you see, by the way, in the mountains, something which you also never see on television. I call it a mandala. Geometrical figures. Here is a circle. Here. And right and left, smaller circles, all together form a gigantic triangle. You see it starts here, going up here. And it's connected with the lines of Nazca. You just never see it on television. Tomorrow I show you better pictures of this here. So after the cult of agriculture, they said, no, it's a pre-Inca sport place. Some sort of pre-Inca Olympia. The next thing an archaeologist suggested, it's a Fata Morgana. Copies of Fata Morgana. Now look at these pictures. This is original Nazca. You just never see it on television. Then the next idea in archaeological literature was a start place for hot air balloons. The next were acre plots, boundary makers, procession streets. Now you see here, 5 of these so-called las pistas, one next to each other in the mountain. They said procession streets. It was a map. It was a cultural atlas. All kind of suggestion, just never something realistic. And to the public, they only show the figures. They never show these things here. I hope you are here tomorrow. You will see pictures of Nazca. So they say, come on, this is impossible. Why does nobody show us the truth? Because he would be shocked if we know the truth. Nazca is still one of these great mysteries in the world. Nazca is in Peru, by the way. So 500 kilometers south of Lima. You can fly to Lima in Peru, then you can hire a taxi or another car, and you drive down 500 kilometers. It's all on the desert. It's a so-called Pan American Highway, which starts here in your country, in Alaska, and crosses the United States, crosses Central America, and goes then to South America. Now look at this. This is Nazca. But you never see this kind of Nazca in television. So, change the subject. You know this, of course. Now, the pyramids are one mystery, and I'm sure you heard speeches about them. That's why I must show you things which you never heard. In the last years, some new discoveries were made in there, which the public doesn't know. Of course, I always know it because I pay backshish, thousands of dollars, and that's the only reason why you get the information there. How was this pyramid constructed? There are hundreds of theories, and some of these theories are absolutely reasonable. They make sense, but we don't know which one is true. Well, the oldest theory is the one with the ramp. They constructed a ramp from the Nile to the pyramid place. But the distance is 4 kilometers. That means the ramp finally is growing and growing higher and higher. The ramp has finally more volume than the pyramid itself. Even if you construct a ramp around the pyramid, it doesn't change nothing. The volume of the ramp, of the stones you use, is bigger than the volume which you have of the whole pyramid. They learned that you need a stick to get the animals on distance. You have a spear. Then they invented the bow, pfeil, was ist Pfeil und Bogen? Arrow? Nein. Bow and arrow. Anyhow, so they discovered slowly that they are hard stones, slow stones, you can cut stones, you transport stones. It's all an evolution of technology. This goes slowly. Now Cheops, the so-called builder, was the 4th dynasty. The evolution of technology was not there for all these things. In the meantime, we know that the Great Pyramids, all the 3 there, are light in the same direction as the star of Orion up there. The oldest god in Egypt is Osiris, but Osiris is the same as Orion. Even in the writing, in hieroglyphics, you can mix it. Now you see, there are shafts inside the pyramid. You will just see them later. And the shafts point exactly on one side to the star of Orion, and on the other side to the star of Sirius. Sirius is the women. Isis. So, Osiris and Isis. In English, Isis. So, you see on our planet, we have, in our solar system, we have 3 so-called inner planets. Inner means from the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth. And then we have outer planets. In the Great Pyramid, inside, you have 3 rooms. You see the distance between one room and the other is not the same. And it's exactly the distance of the 3 inner planets of our solar system. But they could not know that, because at that time, the planet Mercury was not known. The Great Pyramid is not standing just on X places. The distances to the center of the Earth is exactly the same as the distance to the pole. So they knew a few things which they could not have known. Someone must have helped them. Someone must have told them. Who was this someone? And the technology of evolution, the evolution of technology, does not fit with the knowledge of Pharaoh Cheops. I guess you were all there. And you see there are halls. In 823 after Christ, so not long time ago, 1,200 years ago, the pyramid was not looking like this. The pyramid was completely covered with stones. Down there are still some of these stones. So it was all flat, not like stairways you see today. Then in 1823 AD, the Al-Mamun, he was the king at that time, the Caliph of Cairo, he wanted to go inside the pyramid. He was expecting to find gold and jewelry, etc. But it was all closed with these stone plates, so there was no entry. So he simply chiseled at some place, and he created this hole. This hole is still the today's entry for the tourists. The real entry would have been up there. He never found it. This is the real entry. Now as tourists, you climb in here. And then you have to go down on your knees. This is called the upgoing way. It's 23 meters high, but only about, 1 meters high. So 23 meters long, but only about 1 meter high. Now imagine you are there. So you go down on your knees, completely down, and you sweat. You climb up these 23 meters. I often, with tourists, stand at the end of these 23 meters, and you see tourists from some countries, you don't believe it. They come in there with their ties on and their jacket, completely wet. So whenever you have a chance to climb into the Great Pyramid, go like this. Don't take a shower in the morning. Take the shower later after this, because we are all stinking the same way up here. So after this 23 meters, you come in a place which is called the Great Gallery. Imagine, here you come out of this upgoing way, 23 meters. And now you open 47 meters. Before, we were only 1 meter high. Now we are 8.5 meters high. And here starts the great mystery. Starts the great mystery of the pyramid. Why did the constructors of the pyramid first made this narrow, upcoming way? They could not even transport a sarcophagi in there. It was too small. And then this gigantic great gallery here, 47 meters, 8 meters high. There is no explanation of it. We don't know it. So this was the upcoming way. Then up there is the so-called King's Chamber. Down is the so-called Queen's Chamber. This is the so-called Great Gallery. I always say so-called. The word King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber are inventings of us. We don't know how the builders constructed. We just call it King's Chamber or Queen's Chamber or Great Gallery. We go now into this so-called Queen's Chamber, and on the south wall there is a hall. The same hall happened on the other side, on the north side. Now you see I'm standing here and pointing with my finger into the hole. And now what I say is very, very important, really, don't forget it in later discussion. These two holes, south and north, only exist since 110 years. Before 110 years, there was no holes in the wall. It was all closed. 110 years ago, a British man came with a small hammer. He was expecting to find other rooms with jewelry, gold, etc. And he was hammering on the walls. And on two places, it sounded hollow. And only now, he took chisel and hammer and opened here and on the other side. 110 years ago. Now, since this hole is known, archaeology and the whole literature say this was just a ventilation shaft. Then they found out there is no air, there is no ventilation. They said, well, it's a symbolic shaft, simply symbolic, in the maximum 8 meters long, and then it has a dead end. It will not continue. Some 20 years ago, roughly, one of my friends, he's an engineer, Rudolf Gantenbrink, he is a rich man. He constructed a small robot on his own expenses. And he went to Cairo, and he said to these specialists there, with this robot, I can climb, I can go into this hole and this shaft. The Egyptologists there, Professor Dr. Sayhawa, were completely against it. They did not want that he goes in with the robot. But finally said, okay, let this stupid German go in with his robot, he will blame himself. So a new adventure started in the Great Pyramid. The robot was constructed, it was a steel construction. Then they put on cameras, halogen lights, movable in every direction. They made 4 wheels on it. There were 6 electro motors which moved everything. Then some sort of, Raupe? Caterpillar, some sort of caterpillar, like a little tank. And then the adventure started. It was called Edfu Out. See these pictures on screen here. You may have the imagination, well, this is very big. We can climb in there. Forget it, forget it. It has a side length only of about, 16 centimeters. You know, not even a baby or a Lilliput man can climb in there. You need a robot to go in there. You see the walls, sometimes they are flat. Then they found crashings on both sides. Now, Egyptologists, they believed that it is a blind shaft with a blind dead end, and it is only about 8 meters long. The robot just continued inside the pyramid, slowly climbing up and up. The 8-meter mark was taken in 5 minutes. It went there higher and higher inside the pyramid. At 32 meters, a block, you would just see it, stopped the robot. So, whenever the robot tried to overpass this block, he came to the ceiling. So he had to put them back down again 4 times and made the robot smaller from the higher side. Then he took the object and continued. Here we had 32 meters inside the Great Pyramid, and now this robot continues. 32 meters, 45 meters, 40 meters, 45 meters, 50 meters, always inside the pyramid. And they had the believing after 8 meters, it's a dead end. Forget it. At 60 meters, something like a little door appeared with 2 metallic bracelets. One of them was cut off. They found the cut off piece on the right side. Should be on the left side, it was on the right side. And now in the next picture, carefully look at this point here, the laser. The laser goes under the door, which proves this is not the end. It's continuing behind of it. So here we are 60 meters inside the Great Pyramid, starting from the Queen's Chamber, 2 meters horizontal, then climbing up 60 meters up there. The wall here is alabaster. Alabaster looks like marmor, white marmor. Marble. So it must have been an important place, otherwise they would not use alabaster here. That was the situation. That was published in newspapers, maybe you saw it in television, roughly 20 years ago. What happened since there? You never heard something again. So, the American National Geographic Society, a rich company here in your country, they made a new contract with the Egyptologists, and National Geographic Society constructed a new robot. And this new robot of National Geographic Society had a drill to make a hole in here. It was some roughly 12 years ago where they showed they made this hole here, and now they put them 3 weeks before already. They knew exactly that behind the door there is nothing. If they would have measured the secret, they would never have shown it to the public. So there was nothing behind it, but even, you see, there is this wall with the hole, and 23 centimeters behind it, you have a second wall. And obviously the second wall is broken. You see it here? So times passed, and 3 years ago, a rich man from Singapore came again to Cairo and went to the Egyptian Department of Antiquity and said, I have a new robot, better than the one of National Geographic. And this new robot has a sound, and with special sound waves, he will break the wall. They call this new robot Jedi. Now Jedi is funny. Jedi has a double meaning. You see, Jedi in Egyptian language means Cheops. Cheops, the constructor of the pyramid. But Jedi are the Jedi knives of the Star Wars series. They find out everything. Yes, you know this, Michael. Okay, so they put, now, you have one hole, and then 23 centimeters later you have the second wall. So Jedi robot needs a long, a long drill. That was Jedi robot. Now they said, okay, you are not allowed to break the wall. All you can do is a very, very small hole, so small that we can put an endoscope in there. Only an endoscope. You know, with endoscope you go into your body, into your stomach, etc. So with endoscopes you make small pictures, but you can make hundreds of small pictures. That's what they did. And then the computer put all the small pictures together. And what is behind the next wall? Another room. You see? And this other room has something, we don't know what it is. It looks like writings. Maybe it's not writings. We don't know what it is, but definitely it's not hieroglyphs. If it would be hieroglyphs, then we can read it. So at Cheops' time, roughly 2,500 years before Christ, Cheops was writing in hieroglyphs. It's not Cheops' time. I was telling you shortly something about the evolution of technology. You start slowly with stones, with the bow and with arrow. Then you realize you have hard stones and stones which are a little softer. Then you have to learn how to transport the stones, how to cut it. It's all an evolution of technology. Cheops, the man who made this, according to archaeologists, I don't believe a word of it, but it doesn't matter. Cheops was the 4th dynasty. His father came right out of Stone Age. His father was Snorfu. Right out of Stone Age time. What is missing is the evolution of technology. Now, you make this. You see, when you construct the pyramid, before you cannot just move the blocks. You have to have a plan. Engineering work. You have to have a plan. Now you have rooms. You have shafts inside. This is all part of the planning before you start with the construction. You cannot do it later. You cannot finish the pyramid and then somebody makes a shaft which is only 14 centimeters on one side. It's not possible. As I said, not even a Lilliput man could go in there. All this was part of the planning before the Great Pyramid was made. And this planning does not fit into the evolution of technology in the time of Cheops. I told you Enoch was up in the spaceship and he learned a lot of science. Finally, extraterrestrials, they said to Enoch, our work is done here on this solar system. You have become like one of us. You speak our language, and so if you wish, you can come with us. And Enoch said, yes, I will come with you. But please give me the chance to say goodbye to my family before he goes. So Enoch had different wives at that time, which was normal at that time, and many children. His oldest son was Methuselah. So Enoch came down to earth and told to his family that he will leave the planet Earth now with these so-called gods, with the extraterrestrials. And to his son Methuselah, he gave over 100 books. And he said to Methuselah, and now my son Methuselah, here are all the scientific books written by your father. Keep it carefully for the generations after the great flood, because all this was made before the great flood. Where are the books of Enoch? 100 books. The only one we have is the one from Ethiopia. But there are 99 books of Enoch missing. Where are they? Now, our archaeologists believe that the Great Pyramid was constructed by Cheops, while there is absolutely no proof for Cheops. Not one, nothing. There is a little statue, 5 centimeters tall, made of wood, which you can see in the Egyptian Museum. And on the end of it, you find the glyphics which you could, if you wish, translate as Cheops. Even if you translate it as Cheops, it says with no word that Cheops was the constructor of the pyramid. There is no mummy of Cheops, nothing. Herodotus wrote that Cheops was a tyrant. He was the one who constructed the Great Pyramid within 20 years with the help of 20,000 slaves. But all tyrants are dictators at the same time. A dictator and the Great Pyramid should be full of writings with the glorious work of Cheops. I was it, I made it, I did it. But the Great Pyramid has not one simple inscription. It's a total anonymity. It does not fit to Cheops. Then later, some British guys found, was heißt Entlastungskammer? Das wäre ein Wort, haben wir nie gebraucht. Oh God, we don't know that. You see, over the great...
Kannst du das zeigen? Du kannst noch zurück.
Ja, ich weiß gleich, was Entlastungskammer heißt.
Yeah, this one.
You see. How you call this? Here is the King's Chamber. How you call these things over the King's Chamber? What? No, not the tower, no. They call it chambers, whatever. So, yeah, so in one of these chambers, there was found 120 years ago red writings, red markings with red colors, which says Cheops. In the meantime, and this is brand new, definitely found out that the marking is a falsificate. It was made just 110 years ago. It was never from Cheops' time. So there's absolutely no proof that Cheops made the Great Pyramid. But there are old Arabian writers like Ibrahim al-Makrizi or al-Mamun. They said the Great Pyramid was constructed before the Great Flood by a pharaoh with the name of Saurit. And they say Saurit is the same figures which the Hebrew call Enoch. Now, Enoch has given over 99 books to his son Methuselah before the Great Flood and said, keep it carefully for the generations after the Great Flood. Where are the books of Enoch? He and Methuselah were the constructor of the Great Pyramid. He had the technology, the planning, the engineering technology from his teachers, from the sky. So evolution of technology in case of Enoch worked because he was instructed by them. Now in the past years, and I just show you more, we always found new chambers and new shafts in the Great Pyramid. You say, how do we found this? Well, by electronic meanings, special robots, radars and so. Now we know that there are other chambers. We know the exact position where they are. So why is nobody going in there? Because you cannot. The shafts are too small. You cannot climb in there. You need high technology. Those who constructed this one, they knew exactly in the far future only a society with high technology had the chance to go in here. I said the Great Pyramid was opened 823 by Al-Mamun, this caliph now. Imagine that in 823, Al-Mamun would have been in the so-called Queen's Chamber. And let's dream us that there was already a hole there. In reality, there was no hole. The hole was opened later. Let's say Al-Mamun was standing there. He, in his time, had no technology to go into this hole and to climb up the 62 meters. You need high tech to go in there to find this. Without high tech, you have no chance to find this. And the ones who planned it thousands of years ago, they knew exactly. Only a generation of high tech technology has the chance to find this. And we did it. Now, there is another room called the unfinished room under the Great Pyramid. Normally, no tourists are allowed to go there. We go there. When you enter as a tourist into the Great Pyramid, you just pass this wall, which was opened, chiseled open by Al-Mamun in 823. Then you came to a crossing point. All the tourists, you just have to go up here, the Great Gallery, to the Queen's Chamber and King's Chamber. Now, meter. Imagine this, 119 meter. Very narrow. You have to climb there again. You perspire all out of your lungs here. Then you came to a room, which is, when you look vertically, you are now 53 meters in the rock under the pyramid. And from this point, there is another shaft going 3.5 meters down, and it's no way, it does not continue. Again, Al-Mamun was opening the pyramid, and his biographer said he was down here, Al-Mamun, 823 BC, and he was here, and he found 3 different rooms. And in 3 different rooms, he found an impossible technology which he could not understand, including 3 mummies with elongated head. And next to the 3 mummies was a little chair, and on the chair were writings which Al-Mamun could not translate, which means it's not hieroglyphs. So Al-Mamun was so impressed by these bodies and these mummies that he himself gave order to close all the walls, that no one after him could ever find these rooms again. I was there so many times. I always have also a hammer. I knocked on the wall, and sometimes it sounds hollow, but you cannot continue. Today, when you climb into the Great Pyramid, you have to pass a gate like at the airport electronically. Even a Swiss Army knife, you are not allowed to take it with you. You cannot even scratch on the wall. You have no chance. All over in the pyramid are cameras. There are mysteries, definitely. Now, 2,500 years ago, there was a Greek historian. His name is Herodotus. You know it from school. Herodotus was here in Egypt. And he also was in Thebes. Thebes is today's Luxor on the Nile. And he said, the priest there showed him 241 statues, one statue next to the other. And the high priest gave explanations to every statue. So he said, this one's name is such and such, he was living from them and them, this one, etc. And at the end he says, these 241 statues represent 11,341 years. At that time, the gods from the sky were among the humans. Since that time, the gods never returned. 11,341 years. And Herodotus wrote this 2,500 years from now on. So we have to add the 2,500 years. In totally, roughly 14,000 years ago, the gods were among the humans. Since that time now. No, 1 second. A schluck Wasser here. Herodotus also says that under the Great Pyramid, there is a lake, a sea, with absolutely clear water. And inside of the water is a sarcophagus. The sarcophagus with some gifts for mankind of the future, gifts left there by the god of Osiris. In archaeology, they were always laughing about Herodot. What is this idiot talking about 11,341 years? The history of Egypt officially starts about 3000 BC and not 11,400 years. That's all nonsense. And also, what is he telling? A lake under the pyramid? This is impossible. We are here in the Sahara Desert. There is no lake. In the meantime, the lake was found. And of course, thank Bakshish, I was there. The entry is on the side of the pyramid. And then you have to climb down stairs. You come into a room, and from this point you go down, a shaft right down. This part here is roughly 26 meters high. It's so large that you have two staircases here. You come to a little room in the rock. And on this room are 7 niches cut out of the rock. But only in 2 niches are sarcophagi. This one is of black basalt. Basalt is volcanic stone. There are no volcanoes nearby. We don't know where they used basalt. What should the meaning be of it? The next one is granite, cut clearly. They told me that there was nothing inside. I don't know if it's true. So, then from that point you climb deeper again. Before you realize the shaft was so large that 2 staircases had place. There was room for 2 stairs. Now it's not the same. There's only 1 staircase continuing down there. You go deep into the rock under the pyramid. With every step you come closer under the pyramid. On the side. And then you enter into a room with clear water. And in the water is a sarcophagi. Here you see the sarcophagus in the water. You see, these wood bars come from our time because they opened the lid of the sarcophagus. Here now you see, it's not the clear picture. Why not? This is made, the 18 centimeters water are over the sarcophagus. We could not use a flashlight. A flashlight would simply reflect. Then you see nothing, it's like a mirror. So we had to make this sort of pictures here, but you see the sarcophagi. Again, they told us that there was nothing in the sarcophagi. I don't know if it's true or not, but okay. But Herodotus was right. He said there is a lake under the Great Pyramid, which is true. And he also said 11,340 years, and I think this is true too. We are just not true, but he was true on his time. So there are more and more miracles inside the Great Pyramid. And the next mystery continues. Okay. En anders auswendig gemacht, wäre nicht schlecht. Das, ja.
Kannst du noch sagen, dass der Sarkophag grösser sei?
Ah, ja, habe ich vergessen. Yeah, by the way, you see the sarcophagus under the water. Of course, we measured the sarcophagus. So the length and the large and the high. And the sarcophagus is bigger than the second shaft. You see the second shaft, which has only one ladder there, down there. So the sarcophagus down in the water is bigger. They could not put it down this shaft. There must be another entry. So the mysteries really continue. The gods, some thousands of years ago, they told the humans before they left, they will return. Some 400 and 450 years ago, our discoverers went to discover strange countries. 450 years ago, there was no photography, there were no handy mobiles. You just have bad pictures at that time designed now. There was, for example, Francisco Pizarro. Francisco Pizarro was the Spanish one who discovered today's Peru. When he arrived to the Inca on the coast, the natives were falling down on their ground. They were praying to him. They said they believed he was the long-awaited God. They were waiting for the return of a God. The same thing happened with James Cook in the South Sea. He discovered Hawaii and other islands. Whenever he came in contact the first time with the natives, they all fell on the ground. They all believed, oh, finally, the long-promised God has returned. The same thing in Mexico. In Mexico, they came together, Hernando Cortes with the Aztecs. Moctezuma, the leader, believed that the Aztecs are the long-awaited God. They started to worship. Later, they realized, of course, that these are not real God. But the believing of someone returning was already existing. So the believing of the returning of someone is not a Christian invention. It existed long before Christianity. And what do we have today? I am educated as a Catholic, and we Christians, we believe that one day Jesus will return. But the Muslim society, they also believe that their Mahdi will return one day. The great Jewish community, they believe since over 5,200 years that the Messiah will return. Practically every existing religion of today is expecting the return of some gods. I believe neither Messiah, nor Mahdi, nor Jesus, nor whatever will return, but simply extraterrestrials. We did not understand it. We made out religions in our belief. And when extraterrestrials arrive, then we have what I call the shock of the gods. We are not prepared for it. We will be completely afraid. We will have the shock of the gods. That's one reason why I do my job. With 81 years ago, I simply want to say, hello, we have been visited some thousands of years ago, and we can prove it. We have enough indications. And this continues in the next 2 days. They were here, and they promised to return. But we still have that open questions. Why is it possible that extraterrestrials had sex with us? And how did they make the distances? You know, between the stars, this is measured in light years. How did they make these distances? It always said you cannot make it. You need a high speed, over speed of light. It's not necessary. If you have the technology, okay. But if you don't have the technology to make over speed of light, you still can travel. How? You all know the space shuttle here, your American space shuttle. With every lift up, you can transport about 30 tons of heavy weight into an orbit. It's always a question of money. At the moment, the Americans have no space shuttle ready. You work together with the Russians. It's always a question of money. Do you have in practice 4 space shuttles, or do you have 40 space shuttles? If you would have 40 space shuttles, you would start practically every second or third day, or every week, and not every few months. So every week, 30 tons of heavy load into an orbit around the Earth. This will be prefabricated blocks which you put together to a gigantic ring. Why a ring? When the ring is finished, you move it around its own axis. By turning this, moving inside the ring, you create centrifugal force. Centrifugal force works like an artificial gravity. You are not weightless up there. You have ground on your body. In the center, you have to put some machinery, of course not liquid propulsion as we have it today, something modern. And then you start this ring. It could take slowly, maybe 100 years, until you reach just 2% of the speed of light. If these things would reach 2% of the speed of light, you would make the distance of 10 light years within 500 Earth years. Now 500 Earth years, nobody will survive this. It's not necessary, because this thing is locked at the generation spaceship. On board, you make love, you give birth, you die, love, birth, to die, etc. So maybe the 29th generation arrives at the point you want to go. It's not annoying. There are television on board, sports, there are Swiss restaurants, American steaks, whatever, don't worry. And of course, while this thing is on the way, with just 2% of the speed of light, the astronomers will measure around which suns are planets, and planets not too hot and not too cold. Until about a year, we all have been taught in school that our planet Earth has a unique situation in the universe. We are not too close to the sun, it's not too hot. We are not too far away from the sun, it's not too cold. We have water, so the conditions of life. In the meantime, thanks to the Kepler and the Hubble telescope, we know that there are over 3,000 planets only today. And from this, about 5% are similar like the Earth. NASA has given a press conference some months ago where they said only in our Milky Way, we must calculate with 4.5 billions of Earth-like planets. So we are not unique anymore. Our planet not either. So they will find this out with their telescope. Is there a sun with planets which are Earth-like? So the generation spaceship goes there. The generation spaceship itself can never make a landing. It always stays in orbit. And now they use smaller vehicles to go down to the new detected planet. What did we have in antiquity? Ezekiel called it the splendorness of God. The old Egyptians called it the winged sun god. In the Hindu literature, Mahabharata, the Vimanas, they were all smaller vehicles coming down. Enoch was there in a mother spaceship. Always smaller vehicles in the past. So smaller vehicles go down there. Now from the mother spaceship, they tell them exactly, hey, there you find raw material, there you find uranium, etc. Now you give them 500 years to create a technological society. 500 years? We have an industrial society. Since when do we have an industrial society on our planet? Since 180 years, maybe 200 years? So 200 years, but the industrial society is a part of a long evolution. Our forefathers, grandfathers, grandfathers, they all had to make new inventions. They have to invent electricity, steel, all kind of things. It's all a product of a long evolution until we have our technological society, electricity and all this. They don't need this technological evolution. They have all the results in their computer. So you give them 500 years. And after 500 years, they should construct another spaceship, a second one. And now it becomes very interesting. On Earth, one generation spaceship started, was 500 years on the way. After another 500 years, there are two, the old one and the new one. Each one is 500 years away. Then are 4, 8, 16, etc. With only 2% of the speed of light. You don't have to have overspeed of light, only 2%. You could colonize our whole Milky Way within 10 millions of years. 10 million. Now, we made this calculation with 2% of the speed of light. If you have 5% or 10%, it will take only 2 millions of years. So, if you always hear, it is not possible that extraterrestrials visited us, it's all garbage, it's not true. Of course you can do it, even with primitive technology, and this is primitive technology. But why should extraterrestrials have sex with us? Why should they have the same sexual apparatuses? Well, of course in the universe it is possible that you have 10,000s of forms of life which are completely different to us. Maybe there are forms of life like flying elephants or beings with tentacles and whatever. But you also have human form of lives. Why? This is a logical which comes out of the panspermia theory. Panspermia was invented by the Swedish Nobel Prize winner Svante Arrhenius. That was about 70 years ago. Panspermia, and don't forget the word, panspermia. Panspermia says somewhere in our Milky Way, the first form of life existed. Now you can say as a skeptic, stop. How did it start there? We have no answer. In the beginning, we learned in science, in the beginning we had a Big Bang. What started the Big Bang? What was before? We have no answer. In religion, in philosophy, we say, in the beginning there was God, and God was the Word. What started God? We have no answer. Here, just give me a piece of paper, and I make a perfect circle on this paper. And then I give this paper of you. And everyone should answer me the question, where did the circle start? In your logic, you know Erich must have started somewhere, but you cannot answer the question. The circle is closed in itself. It's like here, we cannot answer the beginning. Somewhere in our Milky Way, the first intelligent form of life appeared. And this first intelligent form of life had an interest to spread out its own form of life in a certain section of the Milky Way. Now you do not start with spaceships. You simply infect a section of the Milky Way with your own, wie heißt das? Ja, aber now not, DNA is okay, but Live-Spuren, anyhow. DNA, you can say DNA. You infect with billions and billions of DNA just a small sector of your Milky Way. Of course, when you start this, you know exactly the biggest part of this DNA will come into the gravity of a sun and we will die, burn. Another part will come into the gravity of planets like our, maybe Jupiter, and we has no connections to start life. But a smaller part of it will arrive on similar planets as the one who started with it. As I just said before, Earth-like planets only in our Milky Way, about 4.5 billion of it. So then this DNA came into our atmosphere and landed into our planet. And the rest is evolution. When I was a boy, student, I learned it all started in the so-called primordial soup, that some atoms come together and form finally molecules. But thousands and 10,000s of coincidences. In the meantime, modern science says no, the information of life came from outside. So, panspermia, the rest is evolution. I could go into detail, I make this tomorrow. How at the rest of evolution we have something like us. There's no other way in evolution. So to say, we are the offsprings, of others. And this again is handed down in most of the holy books, including our Bible. The gods or God created humans according to their own image. When you realize that we are offspring, also it does not contradict evolution. I explain this tomorrow. We are offspring, then the others are similar than we. Then you have no problems with sex. They had the same sexual apparatuses. That's why it worked at Enoch and in the Bible, the sons of the gods who made it with the humans. There are no contradictions. Everything makes sense. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I was talking now more than 2 hours. And of course, tomorrow we go on and another day off on. There is always new material which I show you. And in some cases, I make short repetitions just to follow up and to give you the newest thing. It was a pleasure for me to be here. The first time, these gigantic Ozark mountains here. And now I heard from Ramon, one floor down, there are some little, signing tables. I go down there and sit there. I have a few of my newest books here, only a few, not much, because to transport them. And I sit there, of course, I give you signatures and whatever you like. It was a pleasure for me to talk to you. It was an honor for me to talk to you. Thank you that you have come here, and give patience to Erich von Däniken. Okay. Stop.